Let's talk some Ohio State football, though, right out of the gate. And in between our guests, we invite you to call the call-in line at 860-325-3687. I will put the number in the live chat. But without further ado, got Steve Helwagen on the line to talk Ohio State football from Bucknuts. Steve, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. What's going on, Mark?
What is going on? Well, not a very quiet night compared to what was going on, let's say, about 4 nights ago in West Lafayette.
Real struggle for the Buckeyes out there at West Lafayette, obviously. And got to tell you, it was interesting. We knew the weather was going to maybe play a part in the game. We're driving through Lafayette, then across the river into West Lafayette. And there are limbs and trees and power lines down everywhere because the winds were kicking up into the 40s. And we parked a mile away, got on a golf cart they had rigged for us to take us to the game through the golf course there. And there was a tree that had been knocked over. And we asked the person driving the golf cart, well, how long had that happened? And the man said, oh, about a half hour ago. So, yeah, it was kind of like Armageddon over there. It was like I think the game time temperature was 38 and the winds were gusting anywhere 20 to 30 miles per hour, and kind of a tough place to play, but it didn't seem to impact the offenses. They combined to throw for almost 800 yards, I think, between David Blau and Dwayne Haskins for Ohio State. But if you were an Ohio State fan, it was a rough, tough game to watch, no doubt about it.
We get Steve Helwagen on the line from Bucknuts. Please join him right there. He is also a Big Ten senior writer for 247 Sports. Ohio State going down to Purdue 49-20, and the Buckeyes took quite a drop down in the AP and coaches polls from 2 to 11, and we will see soon what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has to say. So, Steve, let's try to dissect this one. 73 passes for an Ohio State offense. This was not, Texas Tech or Washington State under Mike Leach or some other high-powered offense that had to live and die by throwing the ball downfield. This is just alarming to see. And, of course, it was all driven in the fourth quarter by the score of the game, so you have to throw at that point on every play. But even before that, this has become such a pass-heavy, reliant offense.
Yeah, no question about it. You think about the last 5 games, they have now been under 4 yards per carry in each of the last 5 games, which is just unbelievable. I think one of the national guys put out a stat that had only happened 5 times in the first 6 years Urban Meyer was the head coach at Ohio State. Now it's happened 5 games in a row. So they got some major issues in terms of running the football right now. And obviously this is an open week for them. They're back at it November the 3rd against Nebraska. So when they get to that point, I guess maybe we'll have a better idea if they put this time to good use or not. But teams have been sitting on them at the line of scrimmage and making Dwayne Haskins throw the ball. And he does not necessarily throw the ball up the field all that much. He throws it a lot, but a lot of it's underneath stuff. So, I guess when they get back to action, we'll have a better idea, I suppose, of what's going to happen here down the stretch for Ohio State. But with each passing week, it's become harder and harder for Ohio State to establish the run. And that just seems unthinkable when you look at everything Ohio State's been able to do with decent balance here in recent years. Now it is skewed almost entirely to the passing game, and teams have found a way to beat Ohio State even when Haskins throws for 470 yards, a school record.
We get Steve Helwagen on the line from Bucknuts, breaking down Ohio State football. The Buckeyes, of course, coming off that thrashing at Purdue, 49-20. The last time Purdue beat a number 2 ranked team, of course, Ohio State in 1984. That team went to the Rose Bowl, and Purdue had Jim Everett at quarterback. And I'm sure, Steve, you remember that to a certain extent. I know that I did as soon as I saw that factoid during the game.
Yeah, no question about it. Ohio State was able to overcome that, still win the Big Ten championship that season. and got the nod to go to the Rose Bowl after that 1984 season. Lost USC in the Rose Bowl, but still won at least to share the Big Ten championship. As you look at this race right now, the win by Purdue has obviously catapulted Purdue into this position where they are among 4 teams tied with 1 loss in the Western Division: Iowa, Northwestern, Wisconsin, and Purdue. Got somewhat of an elimination game this week. Wisconsin playing Northwestern this coming weekend, and we'll see what comes out of that. Both those teams, their only Big Ten loss was to Michigan. Purdue's loss was to Northwestern. Iowa's loss was to Wisconsin. So obviously they'll all play each other before the season ends, and a lot will be shaken out. It's anybody's guess right now who could win this, because all 4 of those teams really, with the exception, I'd say, of Wisconsin, coming off that thrashing at the hands of Michigan, are playing good football right now. It's just going to be a question who can put it all together here down the stretch. Northwestern obviously outlasted Nebraska, and I think they may have played Rutgers this past week, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, it's been a little bit of a struggle for them perhaps the last couple of weeks, but they found ways to win games. I'm interested. I mean, we got some really good games this weekend. When you're talking about Iowa at Penn State, that's important for Iowa because it counts in the standings, even though it's a crossover game. Then, as we talked about, Northwestern, Wisconsin is at Northwestern. That's going to be a good one as well. So, there are some games that are worth watching. And, of course, Purdue also at Michigan State. And here Michigan State has now got a second Big Ten loss, so they're kind of desperate as well at this point. Although in my mind, with it down to 4 games left for Ohio State and Michigan, seems like they will probably settle that one on the field between themselves. If Ohio State's able to get past Michigan State in East Lansing in a couple of weeks, the winner of the Ohio State-Michigan game seems like they will be the team that represents the East. That seems to be the one fly in the ointment that's still out there, is if Ohio State can win that game at Michigan State. And obviously the other games, Nebraska at home, Maryland on the road, could come down to that last week with Ohio State and Michigan. And very fitting if that is a play-in game for the Eastern Division. Finally, those 2 teams meeting with the division championship on the line. Ohio State already had it clinched last year when they played in Ann Arbor. So, and if Ohio State loses to Michigan State and gets a second Big Ten loss, and Michigan keeps a winning mark, it's very, very – it would be a possibility Michigan would have it clinched before they have to come down and play Ohio State. And at that point, they'd be just playing to stay to obviously finish the regular season and stay in the playoff hunt at that point. So a lot of football left to be played. It's a lot of speculation right now over who's going to fit in where. But for Ohio State, practicing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week. They gave the guys off Sunday and Monday. They will be off Friday and Saturday, although there'll probably be some type of a physical workout for the guys on Friday. But they'll be off Friday and Saturday. No practice per se. Coaches will be out recruiting in high school games this weekend. And then Sunday they'll be back at work for a normal work week, getting ready to return to action on November the 3rd against Nebraska.
I, like you, Steve, am a bit fascinated by the Western Division race. The East gets all the hype.
It's anybody's race at this point. Everybody thought it'd be Wisconsin in a cakewalk, and that hasn't materialized. But, yeah, I think, Wisconsin disadvantaged by those crossover games, having to play Michigan and Penn State both. That's kind of a rough way to go.
And we've discussed it in the past. You either can take advantage, or you have the disadvantage there. And in the past, including especially last year, Wisconsin had a pretty favorable non-division schedule. But this year, as you mentioned, they've got to play 2 of the heavyweights, and both of them on the road. And Iowa seemed to be the one team that could possibly challenge Wisconsin, and we thought that they would have to win that head-to-head matchup at Kinnick Stadium. But with Wisconsin struggling elsewhere, still facing a Penn State team on the road, it's incredible to me that Purdue, in losing its first 3 games, obviously only one of those in the Big Ten, but it's just the look of an 0-3 team. Then 4 weeks later challenging for an SEC or for a Big Ten Western Division championship is interesting theater for me.
And you know what's
yes, sir.
What's even crazier about it, Mark, is that they've got Wisconsin and Iowa still to come to their place. So, I mean, that's just nuts. Purdue has got all the advantages. They could be coming down to the end of the season, playing their rivalry game against Indiana with something really on the line. If not a bowl bid, then perhaps maybe the division, a share of the division championship, and a thought that maybe they would be win some tiebreaker to go to Indianapolis. So, very complicated situation, but at least we're going to have some quality games, I think, on the field to help settle it.
Well, Steve, we're all used to, in sports in general, overreaction after the game. So leading up into this Purdue game, a lot of people on the national stage especially ignored Ohio State's flaws. You knew what they were. I knew what they were. They were fairly obvious, but it was, well, Ohio State and Alabama are going to play. They're both undefeated. They're going to clean the slate, and they'll be showing up in the college football playoff. Those two for sure, and probably Clemson. That was the thought by many. And then they lose one game, and I know it was ugly, 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 but they lost one game, and I'm seeing things where can Ohio State possibly get back into the college football playoff talk? Well, they lost one game. If they win the Big Ten championship, and I understand there's a difference between in the argument of, is this team good enough to run the table and erase that loss and win but the mathematics I don't agree with. If this team wins the Big Ten championship and it only has one loss, yes, there could be an issue if they have to face off against the Big 12 in the college football playoff selection committee's eyes. If the other three, meaning Clemson, Notre Dame, and Alabama, let's say, are undefeated, that's there could be a TCU, Baylor, Ohio State kind of situation with the Big 12 this year. But it's just amazing how they have fallen from grace and from favor nationally.
Yeah, I think it's not so simple to say that if they win out, they're in at 12-1. And I think, first of all, they're going to need to play better. They're going to need to not slough through and maybe squeak by some of these games. They're going to need to play a strong game. Here, Nebraska put up 600 yards total offense this past week in winning their game. They're going to play Bethune-Cookman this week and probably continue to hone what they're doing. They'll come in at 2-6, I believe, when they come to Columbus. And the situation for them is very simple. Another loss, and they are out of contention for a bowl game. So just like we saw with Purdue, they're going to throw caution to the wind, and Ohio State better be prepared for that. Ohio State had no inclination that Purdue was going to pull out all the stops like they did with that fake field goal. A middle school coach would have told you there, do not rush the field goal. Make sure they kick the ball. It's 4 days later. I am still 24 years I've covered Ohio State. That may be the stupidest play I've seen out of Ohio State, and for a number of reasons. They had been outplayed 6 ways till Tuesday in that first half, and yet they got a defensive stop at the 15-yard line. I think they were at the 13-yard line. It was 4th and 4 or 4th and 3, and Purdue was going to kick the field goal to go up 10-3 at halftime, and it was almost like a relief. It was almost like Ohio State got the ball to start the second half. Had they held them to a field goal there, or in hindsight, had the rusher stayed home and tackled the holder who was trying to run for the first down, they potentially can take the lead on the first series of the second half. Instead, they allowed the holder to break contain. As I say again, one of the stupidest plays I've seen in 24 years. How many 30-yard field goals get blocked in the course of the year? Maybe, I don't know if they kick it in the line, maybe 2. I don't know. Because when they kick a 30-yard field goal, the ball goes straight up in the air. There wasn't anybody going to get to that football. Show me all the field goals you blocked. It's just like they roughed the punter later on. Show me all the punts you've blocked. just they were a victim of their own arrogance and stupidity this past week, is what it seems to me. They didn't take Purdue seriously, just like they didn't take Iowa seriously the year before. You'd think that they'd learn these lessons at some point. Now, this was their 8th game in 8 weeks, so there's something to be said for that. Purdue had a week off the week prior, and then had basically a cakewalk against Illinois on the road, a short road trip, and like a 46-7 win. So they weren't extended all that difficult. In 2 weeks prior, they were home rested and ready for Ohio State, which didn't answer the challenge. But at any rate, I'm sure I've digressed from whatever it was that started this discussion, but the whole idea that Ohio State is still in some kind of a position for the playoff, they need to win out, look good doing it. And I think it started with Nebraska. Will they take Nebraska seriously or not? Well, Nebraska's back playing good football, so they better take them seriously, even though the game's at home. They need to win out, look good doing it. And they do need help, as you said. And I'm not even sure. I think Alabama's same scenario as last year. They could lose to LSU. I doubt they would lose to Auburn. But if something were to happen and they lost the game and didn't go to the SEC championship game, they should still be in the playoff, just as they were last year. And perhaps that puts 2 SEC teams in there again. I don't think anybody's beating Alabama. Just throw it out there. I don't think that they can have a second team if Alabama goes on and wins the SEC championship, because I think they'd all have 2 losses at that point, whoever it would be. So I doubt that scenario would play out. I think Clemson is more than likely going to continue to run the table in the ACC. But again, even with 1 loss, they could still win the ACC with 1 loss. Notre Dame, it depends if they lose, it depends who they lose to. They play Navy in San Diego this week. Doesn't seem like it's a game that Notre Dame would lose. I know they play USC later in the season. USC is just kind of floundering a little over 500 right now, up 1, down 1. Maybe they pluck them off at the end of the season. It's hard to say. But you think about it, it's just going to be kind of a case where they do need help. Texas and Oklahoma, the winner of their game obviously was Texas. Does Texas go on and win the Big 12? Does Texas win the Big 12 with 1 loss? Does Oklahoma win the Big 12 with 1 loss? Does West Virginia win the Big 12 with 1 loss? That's still going to sort itself out. And is that team going to be ahead of Ohio State or Michigan with 1 loss, which Michigan continues to run the table that they're in. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Their 1 loss would be to Notre Dame, which would theoretically be a playoff team. So I think we're interested to see which direction it goes.
So they might need help. We don't know if they need help, but certainly that situation leads itself to possibly needing help, because Ohio State fans would not want them to win the Big Ten title with 1 loss at 12-1 and have to go up in a selection against Oklahoma or Texas as a 12-1 Big 12 winner, that most likely, and especially in Oklahoma's case, they would have avenged the 1 loss that they had to Texas, and that was only a field goal at the gun against a 12-1 football team or an 11-1 football team at the time. So that obviously looks much better. And as you mentioned, as strictly a Big Ten observer, for somebody just rooting for the Big Ten to make the playoff, Michigan is the team to root for, because they would have by far the most understandable loss on the road against Notre Dame by a touchdown. And if you believe in the games meaning more as you get closer to November, that game was obviously way, 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 way back there. So 2 things, Steve. Make no mistake about it. You can ramble on about anything you'd like. I have you on here to talk Ohio State football. So regardless of what my question is, you have free reign to talk about whatever you want, whatever comes up. Number 2, I thought it was a great point. We pointed out that's a big statement coming from you that carries a lot of weight when you say in 24 years of covering Ohio State football, that was just about the stupidest lack of preparation for a situation, knowing that you have to be ready for fake field goals, especially when you're playing an underdog.
Yeah. Well, they lose the game 49-20, which is basically 7 touchdowns to 3. Let's review this. One of them was the fake field goal that became a touchdown. One of them was roughing the punter that ultimately became a touchdown. One of them was roughing the passer, which on third down, which ultimately became a touchdown. That's 3 right there. And finally, Dwayne Haskins threw a pick 6 in desperation at the end of the game when they're just wheeling it out there, hoping for anything of any kind of hope. So basically, Ohio State took that game and gift wrapped it and handed it to Purdue. Purdue was the tougher team. Purdue on that night was the better team, no doubt about it. I'm just pointing out that for everything that, for as bad as we think this game was, it was silly mistakes, one after another, several of them on special teams that cost Ohio State the game. Their defense got stops and then was sent back out there again to try and get another stop. And that's probably one of the most difficult things to do in football, particularly when they fake a field goal and now it's 1st and goal at the 9-yard line. That makes it really difficult. They scored on the very next play and went up 11 at halftime, and now it's a 2-score game basically. And Ohio State could not manage a touchdown to start the second half. They got a field goal, and then Purdue just always had that 2-touchdown lead from that point on, basically, when they went down and scored again. So, yeah, it just was just kind of a runaway snowball or a freight train in terms of the Boilermakers, I guess. And we heard that train horn a number of times there Saturday night at Purdue.
At least 7.
And they celebrated, they beat the number 2 team on paper in the country. And those people came onto the field from every direction. And, good for them. Purdue's been through a lot of lean years in the last 5 or 6 years. And, fun thing for them to have that kind of a thing. And now we'll see if they can sustain it going forward. As we said, at Michigan State this week, home games with Wisconsin and Iowa. And then I think at Indiana at the end of the season. They have another game in there somewhere. I'm not sure where it is, but I don't believe it's one of the top teams. So, it'll be an interesting road for them.
It's arguably been the worst program in the Big Ten since about 2008, 2009, because even you could say, well,
Danny Hope,
finishing up a Rose Bowl run in 2007, then they got pretty bad for a long time, and it pretty much sustained that. And if you take out Rutgers and Maryland, during that entire time that there were Big Ten teams in play, Purdue would be in the running for the worst program because they've been abysmal for the most part during that stretch. Maybe made a bowl game or 2 and got obliterated. I know by Oklahoma State about 5 years ago by like 40 points. They've been awful, but Jeff Brom, wow, the job that he's done to not only match the defense of Nick Holt, but also, tailor the offense. We knew that he would bring the offense with him eventually. They actually won on defense last year and got to a bowl game and won 7 games, mostly on defense. They lose the 9 starters on defense. And then he coaches up the offense. And I'm curious to get your thoughts about David Blau now that you've seen him in person, because it's ironic to me that he was considered the running quarterback and Elisha Sindelar the passing quarterback. And, man, he's making NFL throws, and he's just tearing everybody up.
Yeah, 578 yards he threw for against Missouri in a loss. He was well over, I think, 350 against Illinois, the game before Ohio State. In the high 300s against Ohio State as well. And a lot of teams have thrown the ball effectively against Ohio State with big chunk plays. But when you have an athlete the quality of Rondale Moore, the freshman who's highly acclaimed out there, I think his numbers were 12 catches for 170 yards and a couple of touchdowns. The running back Knox was also over 100 yards and had 3 touchdowns. He broke loose for a long touchdown at the end of the game. And Moore, also in probably a microcosm of the entire game, caught a pass near the left sideline. And one of Ohio State's safeties prior just basically tried to take him and fling him to the ground. And it didn't work because Rondale Moore somehow kept his balance and kept his feet churning and then got it back up to full speed again and was gone on just an amazing touchdown. So they've got some playmakers in addition to Rondale Moore and Knox, the running back. They've got a couple other guys who are also pretty good players as well. So they are playing by far their best football right now. Obviously, won 4 games in a row and are starting to really hit their stride on what they can do. Could have won the Missouri game. Obviously could have won the Eastern Michigan game. Could have won the Northwestern game. I mean, at the beginning. 31-27, I think was the final score there, or 41-37. Well, I think it may have been whatever it was. It was I think it was a 4-point game.
The Missouri
and
game?
The Northwestern game, the first game of the year.
34.
Missouri was a
they lost
Missouri was a
field goal. I think it was 34-32.
Yeah, that could be. And Missouri was a 3-point game, 2 3-point game as well. So they've been in every game that they played, haven't been blown out, and going to get a chance against the upper echelon, Wisconsin and Iowa, to show what they can do. They're both ranked teams now. Iowa's taken their rightful place down there about 14, 15, 16 in the polls, and they're just kind of lurking right now. They lost that game to Wisconsin. It was virtually a standoff for 60 minutes when they played Wisconsin, and Wisconsin broke through at the end and had that touchdown, then tacked on a long run after that. But, to me, I think the West has turned out to be a fascinating race, and Michigan State and Penn State haven't necessarily lived up to the preseason hype, and yet very dangerous. I mean, Penn State can beat Iowa this week. Michigan State can beat Ohio State and East Lansing in a couple of weeks, and they throw a wrench into this whole thing. Michigan could be the beneficiary of all this down the stretch.
Steve Helwagen joining us from Bucknuts. Join him at the 247 site there for Ohio State football. He's also a senior Big Ten writer there at 247 Sports. Steve, one quick comment, then I'm going to ask you one more question. We'll let you go.
Okay.
Appreciate all the time you've given us. Rondale Moore, if anybody just caught up with him on Saturday night, he's been catching passes like this since week 1 against Northwestern. He's only a freshman. They showed the clip where he picked up the Ohio State hat when he was making his announcement on National Signing Day, and then he dropped it for the Purdue hat. He comes from Jeff Brom's high school. And what's amazing about him, Steve, as you well know, is that in addition, throughout football history, when we see a guy that quick and small and 5'7" or 5'8", we think of him in the Dante Hall, Eric Metcalf mold, that they're just quick. This kid squats 600 pounds. He's amazing.
He's a crazy athlete. There's no two ways about it. And I think if you have any doubts about what he can do on the football field, just pop in the tape or DVR of that game, and you will see that he can impact the game in a ton of different ways. Also had a few yards rushing as well out of the backfield in some sets. And in the return game, he had a nice return or two as well in the game, and maybe 50 yards in returns. So there's a lot of things. I think his all-purpose yardage was around 250, I believe, when you factored in maybe 30 rushing, 50 in returns, and then 170 or whatever it was in receiving. So he can do a lot of things, and he's only scratching the surface of what he's going to do. He and Brom are making some amazing music together right now. I think that is an intriguing matchup, them going on the road to play at Michigan State. Michigan State's defense has typically been pretty good. I know they've given up a few plays this year here and there, but I think that'll be a tremendous test. And, my thought, you were asking about Blau earlier. I think Ohio State, not having Nick Bosa, obviously defensive end, he's been gone since the TCU game and is not coming back, obviously, now, regardless of his recovery from the core muscle surgery. I think it was probably a less than 50% chance, even if he'd gotten healthy, that he would have gotten healthy in time to help them, I guess is the point that I was trying to make. Maybe by the bowl game he would have been back, but I think it's, again, their pass rush has really suffered without him. I think they only got to Blau twice in the course of the game this past week. And once he settled down, he had some happy feet and was throwing the ball kind of high and wide early. But once they kind of got him calmed down and got him centered, he played a fabulous game. After about the first quarter, he played really well. And Ohio State's pass rush, again, all the issues that they're having in the secondary, perhaps even with the linebackers, I think it begins with the fact that other than Draymond Jones and maybe Chase Young, who had the huge game against Penn State, but really hasn't been heard from Indiana, Minnesota, and now Purdue. They got some real pass rush issues, and I don't know if it's something that they can solve by bringing blitz pressure, running stunts and twists up front. Draymond Jones is tremendous, but when he gets double teamed, as he has been, there's very little he can do. Robert Landers has been in and out of the lineup, one of their top defensive tackles as well. They're hoping maybe this will get him healthy. Jonathan Cooper kind of sparks a play every now and then at defensive end. Malik Harrison at linebacker had 10 tackles and a half sack. But again, as Greg Schiano said, 20 missed tackles. We got a chance to talk to Schiano today, as well as the offensive coordinator, Ryan Day. And Schiano said maybe in a normal game you'll have 4 or 5 missed tackles. Against Purdue, they had 20 missed tackles. So that'll tell you what was kind of afoot for the Buckeyes in that game against Purdue.
So in this day and age, Steve, it's not difficult to imagine even a top-tier team like Ohio State with all the talent in the world maybe struggling in pass defense. That seems to be if you have one struggle on a team that's a top-notch team, because these teams have become so adept at throwing the football, catching the ball. The receivers are so freakish these days, and the quarterbacks have been trained from the time they were 10 years old, going to all these camps, that the development has been so quick that if we see teams struggle in pass defense all over the place. So that one isn't as alarming to me, at least, as run blocking, running game not being what we would expect it to be, with one elite back and one really good back and Mike Weber in the backfield, and the offensive line being generally experienced and 4- and 5-star guys. And then the defense also getting gashed in the run game. All of that. It's not one thing. It's all those things. And from a coaching staff that's kind of an all-star coaching staff.
Yeah, it's a bit puzzling. I think the running game is something they're deconstructing and trying to put back together. They don't seem to run outside a whole heck of a lot. Everything seems to be between the tackles. I don't know what to say. There's no threat of the quarterback running the ball. So in past years where if Barrett didn't like what he was going to see giving the ball to Dobbins, he could keep the ball himself and get yardage. Haskins seems to be loath to do that. So I think that's part of it. I think your offensive line perhaps wears down. They played 100 plays this past week, which is amazing. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe they need an upgrade or two on the offensive line. I think that, again, it's counterintuitive to think that you're throwing for 400 yards. That should open some things up in terms of the running game, but it's actually been the opposite, because Haskins, as I said earlier, does not look to throw the ball that far down the field. A lot of his stuff is crossing routes underneath, where you can sneak that 7th guy up closer to the line of scrimmage and not worry so much they're going to beat you over the top, because maybe they do complete 1 or 2 of those now and then, but it hasn't been how they've done most of their damage. So I think the run game, they've got to come up with a way against a loaded box and no blocking back. I suggested, or I wouldn't say suggested, I asked Ryan Day today that in the year before he arrived, Weber was very effective blocking for Curtis Samuel in 2 back sets. Now, nobody wants to block. I understand that. But is that something that they could use 5-10 times a game to have both those guys on the field together, one blocking for the other one at the point of attack? And maybe that helps clear out enough that they can get to the second level. They're not even getting to the second level. I mean, a 4-yard gain at this point is hallelujah, I think, for them. So I don't know what else to say about that. On the other side, what I think about defensively, I think about a term that I've come to use called the churn. And when you send 3 underclassmen to the NFL every year, as they have with Conley and Lattimore and, all these guys in recent years, and then this past year, Hubbard, Denzel Ward, Jerome Baker, gone, Nick Bosa, essentially the same as having not played at all. He played 2.5 games, also gone. That's 4 starters off last year's team that could be on this year's team that aren't there. Eventually, after 4 or 5 years, it's my experience, 3, 4, 5 years of that, as I say, that churn, that whole thing there where you're churning the butter or whatever, it catches up with you. And I think that they are having a hard and very difficult time filling those spots with top defensive players, and this is what you're left with. This is what it looks like after all the stars have left finally for the NFL. Now, the good news is, if everyone's patient, next year they could have as many as 13 or 14 guys on the defense who were national top 100 picks, and they would be sophomores and juniors at that point. A lot of them are playing this year, like Pryor, Baron Browning a little bit, some of these other guys. But at least, certainly the two defensive backs, Okudah and Wade, would fit in there. Tyreek Johnson is a true freshman this year who was regarded as heavily as those guys. So the star power may be back next year with a little bit of experience and also some hardly earned and learned lessons, let's just say, of how tough it is to play in the Big Ten. That's kind of my feeling, is that eventually, after you had this type of attrition year after year after year, and guys only starting for a couple of years and then going to the NFL. I mean, they had Marshawn Lattimore started 1 year and was gone. Malik Hooker started 1 year and was gone. I mean, you might replace him for a while, but to be able to keep doing that and sustain that year after year after year, very difficult in my opinion. So I think that some of that's come home to roost. There's no special difference maker on this defense. Nick Bosa was it. Draymond Jones, to a degree, can be it. He can probably be carried, but he can't carry, and that is just the fact of life, I guess. The other guys are, I'm not sure. I'm honestly not sure. Some of the guys who are starting now will still be starting a year from now. That's because I think as some of those young guys who have the pedigree as a national top 50 prospect get their feet under them, learn what they're doing at the college level, they'll take over. That's kind of been my experience as well, that it's hard to keep guys who have that pedigree off. They've also had some guys who didn't pan out. Justin Hilliard, Jashawn Cornell, Keandre Jones, they were all national top 100 players, and they're not playing. If they are playing, they're playing as backups and special teams guys. Dante Booker, same thing. So there's 4 guys right there who didn't pan out as top 100 guys typically. Long story short, it's caught up with them this year. That's what's basically happened, and they haven't played well defensively in 8 games, and they got a week here to get it figured out, get those guys some reps, work on them in the film room, and they keep falling for the same things week after week after week after week, giving up big chunk plays, and eventually you either get better or you get left behind, and they're on the verge of getting left behind for a Citrus Bowl. They've played in a major bowl game every year when they've gone to a bowl, other than the Fickle year in 2011. They went to the Gator Bowl. Ooh. The following year, they were on probation and didn't have a bowl. Yeah, every year they go to a major bowl game. They've been in what you'd call the New Year's Six every year, all the way back with Tressel, 04, Alamo Bowl in 04.
Yeah.
Every year but those 2, the year that they were in the Gator Bowl and the year that they were on probation, they didn't go to a bowl game. But they have been in one of the top 4 or top 6 bowl games from 2005, 13-year span. It would be 11 of those 13 years they've been in a major bowl game. And to be very honest with you, that is in some doubt. If they lose to Michigan State, lose to Michigan, and now you're sitting there at 9-3 and you don't go play for the Big Ten championship, you're probably going to Orlando. You're probably going to the Citrus Bowl or Tampa to the Outback Bowl, which is almost unheard of for Ohio State at this point, like we said. So, yes, they got a lot to play for here in the last month. We'll see if they put the pieces together here this week.
Steve, I should have mentioned this out of the gate. You don't have to make a long statement on this, but really the most up-to-date storyline concerning all this is some combination of tension in the athletic administration between Gene Smith and Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer's health. Is Urban Meyer going to come back? Were the issues with Zach Smith kind of a carryover in terms of tension and all those things? There's a lot brewing there. What do you think is real or perceived there?
Yeah, I saw the Football Scoop report as well. There were no sources that were mentioned, and I don't want to dispute or debunk what they said. It seemed to indicate that Urban Meyer was sore at the people above him, which is the President Drake, and the athletic director, Gene Smith. He was asked about it on the teleconference yesterday. He says that he and Gene Smith work closely together, talk darn near every day about whatever's going on. I think that Meyer has, it's one thing to be the emperor of everything that you see, which he certainly is, but at the same time, the emperor still needs to procure things through the proper channels. And I think that's how his relationship with Gene Smith has evolved over the years, that he sees him as a resource man for what he wants done. And basically, they've given him everything that he wants to get things done, including salaries for assistant coaches. Gene Smith has helped him get everything he wants. And I think that's what Meyer's appreciation level seems to me to be with Gene Smith. He could be upset with Drake about having to sit out the 3 games still. That could be a lingering resentment until the day one of them leaves the university. I don't know. Regarding internally, I think it's just the normal push-pull of what happens behind closed doors. And honestly, there was even some barking going back and forth that appeared between Schiano and Meyer on the sideline, I think, during the Minnesota game when some things were kind of going sideways. So I think it's just part of the normal progression of things. And I think that just the way that way things happen, as they said, it's one thing to yell and scream at each other. The important thing is getting back down to work and getting it fixed. That's what they're working on this week.
Steve Helwagen joining us from 247 Sports. Join him right there at Bucknuts for the best in Ohio State football coverage. Steve, we appreciate all the time that you gave us tonight. Thank you so much for that. And certainly, Ohio State, Nebraska Buckeye fans can take the week off and lick their wounds, maybe enjoy some other college football before we get worried about Nebraska coming up. Thanks so much, Steve.
All right, Mark. Take care.